Start by going through a little bit around, the history of some of these recent packages. We go to the next page. So I think we're most recently familiar with the Great American Outdoors Act, which I think was really historic legislation. Probably there has not been as consequential legislation for certainly funding of the public lands and otherwise in maybe 60 years. But this was provided two things. One was maintenance backlog funding to reduce the growing maintenance backlog on public lands, and dedicated $900 million annually to the Land and Water Conservation Fund. Two things that were seemingly separated that came together towards the end of the last administration with really strong bipartisan support. Go to the next slide. And it goes without saying that it's unusual that you would see Nancy Pelosi, Kevin McCarthy, Chuck Schumer, and Mitch McConnell all saying really good things about the same bill. But this highlights the impact of the Great American Outdoors Act and this concept of bringing together not a small package, but a pretty narrow package of recreation ideas and getting them across the finish line. Previous to this, if we could go to the next slide, was the John Dingell Conservation Management and Recreation Act, which was signed into law in 2019 on March 12th. And this did a whole host of things, including protected over 1 million acres of public lands. It permanently authorized the Land and Water Conservation Fund, sort of that first step before permanently funding it. It had a sportsman's package in it, and it dedicated about 1.3 million acres of public lands as new wilderness and other types of public land designations. So pretty consequential bill, a very consequential bill at the time. It actually was a combination of a lot of different provisions that were all pulled together over literally like 10 or 15 years. There hadn't been a public lands package in a long time. This was a big comprehensive bill. If we could move to the next slide, that also got really strong support as it relates to congressional leadership on both sides of the aisle really coming together and talking about why this bill is important and why it has impact. The reason I think it's important to start this conversation with highlighting sort of our recent history is because this period from sort of the 2018 period to now has been maybe throughout history and others that have been doing this for a long time. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Has been one of the more successful periods of advancing outdoor recreation policy, certainly in a long time. And two very consequential bills that took decades to pull together are both now signed into law. So the reason why I think that's important is, one, we have a pretty good history here, but two, outdoor recreation seems very well positioned to move in a package. Some of the issues, especially if you look at this bill, the John Dingell Conservation Management and Recreation Act, there is a ton of issues all put into this package. Some of those would be very difficult to move alone, and some of them maybe don't have the broad appeal to move alone. Some of them, probably could move without trading other issues to get bipartisan support. So advancing our issues through sort of a legislative package is not something new. It's something that Congress has sort of gotten used to. And in my opinion, I think it's something that Congress is going to do again. We can go to the next slide. So talking a little bit about whether this is possible, we just heard from House Natural Resources that they're going to have a hearing next week on what I would think is the beginnings of a package of 3 or 4 bills. We can go to the next slide. If I was to guess, there's a whole host of issues that could be wrapped into a legislative package, and I would really like in the question and answer period to have folks highlight other issues that could be in here. But certainly the SOAR Act, this is legislation that was introduced last year on the House side, actually by then Representative Holland, now Secretary Holland. It is a permit streamlining bill that eliminates duplicative permitting regulations and also allows for permitting to be done in a little bit more transparent way. The Recreation Not Red Tape Act, which was just recently reintroduced, is also a bill that creates a number of new management designation for outdoor recreation. It also helps with some permit streamlining. It also does some really great work around veterans in the outdoors. The Replant Act, which I think everyone is familiar with. There's been some talk about maybe domestic manufacturing incentives around the outdoor recreation industry. There's certainly a lot of talk about the climate initiative around 30 by 30, which is now titled the America the Beautiful initiative. This is protecting 30% of lands and waters by 2030. The Recreational Trails Program, which is a big issue that is underfunded and needs some adjustments, maybe not for a recreation package, but hopefully for a transportation bill, and then some campground modernization programs as well. There's a host of other issues that are out there that are being considered. I just mentioned the ski fee bill, which is one that is being considered next week in the committee. There's a lot of policies, but there's also a lot of interest on both sides of the aisle and both sides of the Capitol of innovatively thinking through new issues. What else is out there that can move? What else is out there that can get bipartisan support? What are the other issues that the outdoor recreation industry or stakeholder groups, or maybe even the federal government feel restrained on in terms of creating really great recreation experiences across not only our public lands, but otherwise? How do we eliminate barriers to get more people outdoors? And these things are happening pretty quickly, actually, but there's still room for new, interesting, and innovative ideas, especially those that can gain bipartisan support. So I know that the industry is evaluating what those could be, and I think there's certainly a lot of thought going into it. There's a number of issues that people are looking at to try to include into the infrastructure package, assuming that moves. There's a number of issues that people are looking to include in the transportation bill, assuming that moves. And there's a number of issues people are thinking about on the funding side in FY22 appropriations. But there is room within thinking through how do we advance more targeted outdoor recreation bills and putting together a package. So when we give this talk fairly frequently, we always get the question of do we think this is going to happen? And what are the chances of it happening? And when the Great American Outdoors Act was introduced, I think people did not think it would happen as quickly as it did. But there's a few reasons why these packages, these recreation initiatives, are gaining more traction than maybe other sectors. I think if you talk to folks in the healthcare sector or the tax sector or the trade sector, they would really like to have the success rate that outdoor recreation has. And there's a couple reasons that this is suddenly moving forward and these packages are coming together. One is members of Congress are a lot more educated today on outdoor recreation and the local impacts, not only from a industry and economic growth standpoint, but also in terms of the opportunities to respond to current priorities, things like equity, things like health and wellness, and climate and resiliency. All of these sort of big themes that the administration and Congress are looking at, outdoor recreation is a big solution for that, or at least a part of a big solution. Secondly, I think people understand the local impacts of outdoor recreation. If you go to communities that really have prioritized outdoor recreation, it's helping grow economies. It's bringing businesses nearby. It's allowing more people to have really good outdoor recreation experiences closer to home and eliminating some of the inequities that exist in terms of quality outdoor recreation opportunity. And also, I think people are here, members of Congress and the administration, everybody else are hearing from constituents back home that see outdoor recreation as a real important piece of infrastructure that they've grown to rely on. And if you look at the data across COVID, America is really rediscovering the outdoors. More people are getting outside. Families, for the first time in a long time, are getting back on their bikes or going for hikes or finding new trails. The number of people that I've heard of say, I didn't even realize this park existed, or I didn't know we were so close to a national forest. Everybody is experiencing outdoor recreation in real time, and policy needs to catch up with that. And policymakers, I think, are in alignment with that and see the real impacts and need for it. So there's a significant demand. Lastly, before we get into a conversation, Chris, if we could go to the last slide, I thought I'd just highlight what are the different factors that are going to drive this recreation package if it happens. One is always legislative vehicles. If the package is strong enough on its own, it can move on its own. It may need to be added to another vehicle, like so much does at this time. And right now, there's only a handful that are what I would call must pass for the rest of the year. It's basically something to do with spending. The FY22 appropriations process expires at the end of September. I think they will extend that beyond the end of September, probably towards the end of the year. And at some point, there will have to be some package that funds the government. And that's always an opportunity to add more things to it. Secondly, is through the transportation bill. The transportation bill also theoretically expires at the end of September. That will also likely be extended if I were to guess. And that could carry a number of other things. But since it has a deadline on it, I would expect that will get some attention. Third is whatever happens with infrastructure. And I think this is a big week. This week and next is a big week to really better understand logistically how Congress and the administration are going to approach infrastructure. Logistically, meaning how are they going to get it through Congress? There's a couple different process possibilities that we don't need to go into here, but I think we'll know pretty quickly if infrastructure will be something that goes through regular order or not. And if it does, that is another area where this could be added on. And then lastly, probably not the most obvious opportunity, but the fourth area that does have a deadline is the National Defense Authorization Act, which expires at the end of the year. And that bill from time to time does carry other issues on it. It's actually in the past carried some public lands issues on it. I don't anticipate that will be the vehicle, but those are the sort of must pass bills. Other than that, this is potentially could move on its own if it got enough bipartisan support, if it was the right split of issues. And that's, in my mind, looking pretty good based on what's already out there. The second factor is what actually does happen in the infrastructure package. That's clearly taking a lot of political capital and a lot of focus. So regardless of whether our issues are included or not, and I would assume some recreation focused and outdoor focused issues will be, depending on how they push that through and the timing that takes and how long a process that is, that could have implications to all other legislation, including what we're looking at in terms of a package. The broader congressional agenda, we're sort of moving out of COVID, and there's still a lot of focus there, but Congress is starting to look at additional issues to get through prior to the end of this Congress. And I think that looks like as the agenda opens up, there's more opportunity to move across the board new issues, and we fall into that category. The White House is driving a lot of this agenda. So where the White House stands on priorities, including ours, will be important. Where we are in economic recovery, a lot of the outdoor recreation issues can certainly be put into the economic recovery bucket. I think where we stand on the economy matters in terms of what they're going to prioritize for the House and Senate floor. Champions, making sure that there's some form of bipartisanship that's moving this through. It has to be bipartisan in order to get through, I believe, with one exception. But I think for what we are looking for, this will have to be a bipartisan bill. I already mentioned timing. And then the two other pieces are impact on sort of the core issues of the administration, climate change and equity. And I think the core legislative efforts around outdoor recreation both touch on those. And I think any package that that advances will have climate and equity in it. So with that, I think we can stop sharing. I'd love to hear people's input and thoughts. And I know I see a lot of friends on the call here. I'd love to get a little bit more insight from you all on what you're thinking and take any questions. So with that, Chris, maybe I'll turn it back over to you.
Thanks, Charles. I'd like to kick it off with one question actually from your slides, if you don't mind. And as I'm asking this question, if you have questions for Charles, feel free to put them in the chat and I'll call on you. So we're in this really interesting legislative context where both the House and Senate have slim to no margins in the majority. And in our recent memory, we had the Great American Outdoors Act pass with 73 votes in the Senate, which, as you mentioned, was somewhat unprecedented in recent history, but a reflection of how popular outdoor rec and conservation are. Looking at this list here, do you see certain packages or bills that would fit in that same bipartisan category? And which ones do you anticipate really being on the margins with the Mansions, Cinemas, Murkowski's, Testers, those sorts of folks who are going to have to go either way?
Yeah, the good news is all of these are sort of a subset of examples, but all of these are bipartisan. I think 30 by 30 right now is a concept. It's not a policy initiative, but the manner in which they outlined most recently in the report on what that would be, I think gained some support there. But most of these or all of these right now are bipartisan initiatives. So I do think most can fit in there. I think when you look at not Great American Outdoors Act, but the one prior to that, there were some issues that I would say didn't have broad bipartisan support. For example, there were some national heritage areas that there were some objections to, just as an example. But the fact that they were packaged with a lot of things that gave everybody significant wins, they were able to push the entire package over the finish line. I don't think that there's a lot of really partisan issues within our space right now in terms of recreation policy that would be put into a package that we would need to worry about. Senator Manchin obviously has been a real champion of outdoor recreation, and I think their staff, would be drafting the bill. So I think we're in pretty good shape on that front. Obviously, as these things take form and start moving, policymakers and staff start really trying to add initiatives to it, and sometimes that's where some of the complication comes in. But we don't really see extremely partisan policies emerging to date.
Wonderful. Other folks on the call, any questions that you'd like to bring forward to Charles?
Hey, Charles, this is Aaron Bannon from America Outdoors. Thanks for the update. And of course, I don't think we've had much of a conversation together, but it's good to see you and appreciate your take. And I'm just curious what you think about how things go in House Natural Resources will impact the movement of a recreation package in the Senate. I'm thinking in particular of the SOAR Act and how influential it is, and I guess the tension around co-sponsorships with that bill. So I wonder if you could talk to that a little bit.
Yeah, so I had the great honor of working first in the Senate for a few years and then over in the House for a number of years beyond that. And the one thing I learned is they operate extremely differently, not just in terms of procedurally how they work, but also sort of culturally how they work on legislation. And so I think some of these things sort of evolve over time, but my guess is that the SOAR Act is going to move out of Congress, out of the House, one way or the other. I don't think they'll package them together. I think they'll do them as individual bills in the House. And the SOAR Act on the House, if Democrats are moving it, it's not it's not a hard thing to get across the finish line. So there is sort of a co-sponsor issue there that you mentioned, but certainly the House, they'll be able to move it, hopefully with strong bipartisanship, but it is expected to pass in the House. On the Senate side, the reason why these packages work is because it's just more difficult to move legislation. You have to get at least 60 votes. There's very limited floor time, where the House passes 2 or 3 major bills a day when they're in legislative session. The House does it, the Senate works at a lower pace, maybe 1 a week or 1 every other week, and sometimes longer. So there's just not logistically the opportunities to pass a bunch of bills individually, unless they do it by unanimous consent, which means any senator could stop it. So what my guess is, not just for SOAR, but for a lot of these other issues in the House, they'll very easily pass them through the floor and either by suspension where they need 2/3 of the members, or they'll just put it under rule and move it. And then when it gets to the Senate, they'll probably have to refigure that a little bit and start pushing things together and passing it as one. And that still may not require a floor vote. They could still do it on by unanimous consent, but it's a little bit harder to get an agreement over there than in the House, where the majority sort of makes all those decisions. But SOAR is an interesting bill because it has passed in the past, pardon the expression, but it does have a strong history to it. It has always had bipartisan support. The provisions in it have remained very bipartisan. And Aaron, you and your organization have been sort of really a big leader in making sure that this bill is drafted the way it is and gets across the finish line. So I certainly applaud you for that. I think what needs to happen is, as this moves forward, we, all the groups, and ORR is a big supporter of this, and others, really needs to highlight the importance of these individual bills moving, not because they won't move on their own through the House, but because we really need to build bipartisan support in the Senate so nothing becomes controversial and we can move a lot of these things as a package, which makes it just a little bit easier to get across the finish line. Aaron, did that answer your question? That was a little rambling, but.
Yeah, no, that was fantastic. Thanks. I appreciate your work on this, and yeah, I definitely hope that Senate leadership will finish this thing through. So, something with the 117th. Thank you.
Thanks for the question, Aaron. Derek.
I'd love to just have a little discussion about FLREA and about the range of wrenches that we need to have in our toolbox. Over the course of the last 40 years, we've had great successes in terms of applying motorboat fuel to fishing and boating, and to off-highway vehicle and snowmobile fuel to trails and a variety of other kinds of things. It really is an opportunity for us to look ahead at technology. And as we shift the Highway Trust Fund concept and look at something other than a fuel tax to collect revenues for roads and everything else, we should be a part of that debate. And it is important to recognize that this has been a minefield for the authorizing committees. We have to help them get through this so that they don't get impacted by adversity. But on the other hand, whether it's the fees that are paid by outfitters, guides, concessioners, or whether it's the ski area revenues, there are so many streams of revenue that are there. And I think it's important to note that the FLREA total revenues this year could hit, with the Park Service back in full fee collection, $500 million. And we've seen a eroding of some of the protections in terms of how that money can be spent. It is now being proven to be fungible and being applied to just what would normally have been operating costs of the agencies. That's not the way FLREA started. FLREA was very much designed to be the frosting on the cake, to be the excellence in terms of outdoor recreation opportunities on federal lands, not to be the basic. We can renegotiate that, but I think we have to understand that there is less enthusiasm among some of those who are paying fees because the fees are not being distinguished and held apart.
Derek, thanks for bringing that up. And it goes without saying that for anybody interested in Florea, this could be your year. And there's a lot of people talking about it, and there's a lot of people looking at what changes need to be made in part thinking through if there are other places that should be included in Florea, like the Army Corps of Engineers. But Derek hits on a really important point, which is over the long term, and by long term, maybe it's more the midterm, the most important issue that needs to be addressed as it relates to outdoor recreation, just like a lot of other sectors are looking at, is funding. Even with the Great American Outdoors Act, which I think is a historic bill that really made a incredible impact, or will make an incredible impact on not only building great local infrastructure and outdoor recreation opportunities, but also reducing the backlog. It's still not solving the problems entirely. There's still challenges out there that need to be addressed. Budgets are getting more difficult, not only at the federal level, but state budgets after COVID have taken a significant hit, and there's obviously a lot of other needs out there. So even meeting some of the non-federal requirements for states and localities is becoming very difficult. So funding in general is going to be really, really a big issue going forward for outdoor recreation and public lands more broadly. And I think Derek's exactly right. We need innovative solutions. We need very thoughtful long-term solutions. And we also need to, where possible, leverage technology. And and Derek and I have had a number of conversations about a number of solutions, some good, some bad, but there really needs to have some thought leadership around this from the industry and stakeholder groups and the government all together, thinking through how do we bring funding solutions over the long term to traditional revenue gaps that are continuing to grow. And I'll give you one example since Derek reminded me of it. There's imbalance in a lot of areas where funding should be going that isn't going. In the recreational trails program, for anybody that's interested in that, is one where the revenue that's coming into the program is significantly underfunded based on how much revenue should be going into the program. And there's a really good, strong effort by ORR and CRT and others that are looking at legislation to help ensure that the right amount of funding that's coming in through gas taxes are going towards that program so that trails could be built and maintained across the country. But there's a lot of issues like that. And I think we certainly cannot avoid some of the future shortfalls by assuming that organic funding is going to continue, because these programs are changing rapidly and the needs are increasing at the same time.
Thanks for the question.
We're almost at our deadline here, Chris, but if there's...
Yeah, we have a few more minutes if someone has a burning question. I do have a question for you, Charles, just thinking about the moment that we're in, coming out of a pandemic, looking at economic recovery on the verge of 30 by 30 with shifts in work and culture. Can you talk a little bit about the political strategy that you think will be most impactful and effective to meet this moment, particularly when looking at the 30 by 30 initiative, which of course has many details still to be ironed out, but how the outdoor recreation industry might message around this moment?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, I know we have 2 minutes, so I'm going to say this really quickly, but I think COVID says a lot about the power of outdoor recreation. When people look at outdoor recreation as a solution to so many of the issues that are out there during COVID, health, as I said before, health and wellness, equity, climate change, the economy. And so when it comes to 30 by 30, I think, there needs to be a real understanding of what the details are. But I think there's a strong belief that outdoor recreation can can work in alignment with climate change policies and conservation, where we don't need to be reducing or eliminating recreation access in order to protect lands and waters. And I know that the outdoor recreation community is stepping up to help ensure that access and conservation can happen at the same time. And I believe that is something that was also outlined in the most recent report. But we'll have to see how the debate goes. But this is an opportunity. There's a real opportunity to become part of a significant conservation and climate discussion. But I think from a recreation standpoint, we need to be excited to join that conversation, be active in that conversation, and make sure that outdoor recreation has a real solid seat at the table, because there's a lot that outdoor recreation can do to help advance resiliency and conservation and all the issues around it.
Thanks for that, Charles. And I'll just point out Derek's comment as well. Healthcare costs are just swamping government spending, roughly 50% of the government budget. And there's a lot of opportunity at that health and nature intersection to reduce the spending load on healthcare and into other health beneficial sorts of activities and infrastructure, like we all are united behind in this industry.